Senate Democrats push new legislation to counter Chinese regime. China increasingly slams exit bans on citizens and foreigners. Businessman flees China due to harsh economic conditions. Another CCP wolf warrior in Japan makes a shocking statement criticizing Japan's defense of Taiwan.
Senate Democrats launched a new legislative effort to counter competition from the Chinese regime, to further boost U.S. technological ability amid China's rising threats. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats announced on May 3rd that they would introduce new legislation to tighten rules to block U.S. technology and capital from going to Chinese firms in the next few months. It also includes restrictions banning China from buying U.S. farmland, as well as rules deterring China from engaging in a conflict with Taiwan. Schumer said the new legislation, also known as China Competition 2.0, is a step further from last year's bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act, designed to strengthen the semiconductor industry and other technology with over $52 billion of support. Lawmakers praised that package as an essential step to support American firms to be more competitive with China. Schumer said, "Today we are announcing a new initiative, one that will build on this momentum and develop new and significant bipartisan legislation." He said he hoped the legislation would be bipartisan despite the divides in Congress on other issues. Schumer informed that Senate Republicans had been backing some of the ideas proposed for the package. The bill will need support from Republican senators to become law, as Republicans control the House of Representatives. He added, "The Chinese government is not constraining itself in its pursuit to dominate the 21st century. If we in America rest on our laurels, if we let the CCP beat us, it would have serious consequences for the world's democratic nations." A new report has revealed a rising number of victims of China's exit bans in recent years, and they include executives from other countries. In a May 2nd report, Safeguard Defenders observed that those barred from leaving China for political reasons have significantly increased over the past 5 years. These include critics, foreign reporters, human rights defenders, business people, officials, and ethnic and religious groups. Safeguard Defenders found that those mentioned in the Supreme People's Court's official database showed an 8-fold increase between 2016 and 2020. The group, however, noted the precise number could not be clarified due to China's opaque bureaucracy. The report said, "Even though the number of entries does not equal the number of exit bans, this dramatic jump likely mirrors a similar trend in exit bans recorded on the database, mostly civil disputes." The group also says, "Tens of thousands of Chinese citizens are barred from leaving at any time." It also mentions a 2022 academic paper that detected 128 cases of foreigners being exit banned between 1995 and 2019, including 29 Americans and 44 Canadians. The report warned that the Chinese Communist Party's regulatory system has become sophisticated to the extent that anyone may be a target. It uses the measure to intimidate and exert control and pressure on the targeted victims. Between 2018 and July of this year, China introduced at least 5 new or amended laws permitting exit bans, for a new total of at least 15 laws. The most recent is Beijing's amendment to its counter-espionage law, which uses potential national security risks as a clause for officials to investigate any individuals, no matter where they come from. This has raised concerns among the international business community in China. According to the Washington Post, Lester Ross, a Beijing-based lawyer and chair of the policy committee at the American Chamber of Commerce in China, said, "Companies really have to swallow hard before allowing the risk to their own employees of being detained." Ross continued that talking about an exit ban seldom provides practical help to the person restrained by it. Considering this year only, the Chinese Communist Party has persisted in raids and detention of foreign companies, such as U.S. due diligence firm Mintz. Ross said, "It's very difficult for companies to do business if they cannot evaluate their counterparties, examine information, and be aware of the performance of China's economy on a detailed basis." Despite the Chinese regime's efforts to show the world its economic growth in the face of the pandemic, statistics and testimonies tell us of a very different reality. In an interview for the Epoch Times, Chinese businessman Meng Zuan tells us how he lost business during the 3 years of confinement and blockades imposed under the zero-COVID policy. I had my personal experience. All the effort I put in for years went down the drain because of the closures. There is no way China will recover in a few months, or even a few years. He also rejected claims made by the Chinese Communist Party that the economy recovered following its reform and opening up approach to boost manufacturing and industry. On the contrary, these measures were the cause of his ruin, which is why the businessman decided to flee China and settle in the US. Meng Zuan was a manufacturer of latex-based products, with customers in Southeast Asia. His plant was located in Nanning, China, near the Vietnamese border. The factory was forced to shut down for weeks or months each time the closure order was issued under the zero-COVID policy. The company had no subsidies or assistance from the state. It tried to survive by bribing officials who could arbitrarily ban its products under the guise of a positive COVID test. Some 90% of the companies within the industrial park had to close. Zuan lost $43 million in business because of the blockades. In addition to the losses from stopping production, they still had to pay minimum wages and government-mandated PCR tests. Meng Zuan said that all the companies in the park had to bribe officials who came to verify the tests, adding that it was not for pandemic control, but to get the money. The bribes included cash, expensive cigarettes, and alcohol, as well as meals at local restaurants. While private companies suffered from the health blockade, state-owned companies continued to produce regularly. After investing $1.16 million since 2020 and losing everything due to the closures, Meng decided to close the company on Chinese New Year 2022. 2 months later, he left China for the United States. Only he could leave the country, and his wife did not make it out. Even so, the businessman said he would not return to China as long as the Chinese Communist Party ruled the country. During the pandemic, Meng was able to recognize the farce that the Chinese regime staged to control the people, thanks to programs that circumvent the internet firewall by accessing information from abroad. While the rest of the world was abandoning health restrictions, in China they were intensifying. Several of his acquaintances in the industry are prepared to sell their assets in China and move abroad. According to the businessman, economic conditions are terrible. Exports were stifled, and domestic consumption fell to a terrible level. The Chinese government's propaganda about its economic growth is falling like a house of cards in the face of the testimony of its own people. After the Chinese ambassador to the Philippines and the Chinese ambassador to France, Liu Xiaoye, made shocking statements, the new Chinese ambassador to Japan, Wu Jianghao, also followed suit when publicly criticizing Japan for defending Taiwan. He even warned, "Japanese people will be led into the pit of fire." This wolf warrior statement has aroused public outrage. According to RFI, at a press conference on April 28th with the theme China's Foreign Policy and China-Japan Relations, Wu Jianghao criticized the statement that whatever happens to Taiwan is what happens to Japan as absurd and dangerous. He also said it's dangerous to intervene in China's internal affairs. If Japan is tied to the chariot of splitting China, Japanese people will be led into the pit of fire. Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs released this year's Diplomatic Blue Book last month, calling the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, the greatest strategic challenge in history. In response, Wu Jianghao said, "Unfortunately, the Japanese side has openly considered China as the greatest strategic challenge ever, followed and cooperated with certain countries to oppose and contain China, exaggerated the China threat, and accelerated the pace of arms expansion. If the Japanese side keeps being based on such a cognitive positioning and policy tone, the foundation of China-Japan relations will be significantly damaged." Earlier, Chinese authorities arrested a senior executive of a Japanese pharmaceutical company in China without warning, searched several American companies in China, and detained several employees. On April 26th, the CCP passed the revised counter-espionage law. The new law will take effect from July 1st, making foreign investors concerned about the safety of investing in China. In response, Wu Jianghao said, There are tens of thousands of Japanese people who have done business with China for decades. How many of them have been arrested? Why were these people arrested? They know it well, and the Japanese side also knows it well. Wu Jianghao also criticized the G7 foreign ministers meeting. I don't agree with saying that the G7 represents the international community. It can't represent it. I can be sure that the influence of this mechanism will continue to shrink and will be fruitless. In recent years, in addition to pursuing the wolf warrior diplomatic strategy, the CCP has also put its ambitions of external expansion into action. Guo Yuren, executive director of Taiwan's National Policy Research Institute, said if the CCP invades Taiwan by force, the first countries it wants to attack are Japan and other countries around Taiwan. The purpose is to prevent these countries from supporting and supplying Taiwan. Gao Shuotai, Taiwan's former representative to the US, recently told the media on May 2nd that Beijing's wolf warrior diplomacy, whether it's words or actions, whether it's out of control or extravagant, it's not beyond our expectations. He said Beijing's ambitions for Taiwan's sovereignty and territory are clearly revealed, from buying Taiwan to scaring Taiwan, from scaring Taiwan to deceiving Taiwan. The CCP has used all those methods. Fighting Taiwan may be their desperate option.